A lot of times people will believe the way in which you show that you care about somebody is to not expect much out of them. Don't challenge them. Don't push them. Don't make them work hard. Don't expect them to work hard. They have to have a strong work ethic. There's an old saying, work smarter, not harder. That's not accurate. You got to work smarter and harder, and you can't separate the two. There's no high level of success that you're going to achieve without a work ethic. You have to show up. You have to be responsible. You have to be on time. People have to know that they can rely on you, not only in school, but when you get into the workforce. They have to be able to rely on you as a family member, as a friend. You have to be reliable and responsible. And you have to have a curiosity about you that you're constantly looking to grow. You're interested in knowing more than you already.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Habitual Growth Podcast. I have the pleasure of interviewing a very special gentleman, not only to the Colorado educational system and potentially, I would say, even the global education system. And Don, you're going to talk a little bit about that. But also, Don has become a personal friend of mine through his relationship with some family ties as well. So this is going to be a really fun one. We're going to get into a lot of things education from somebody who knows the business in and out. So with that, just a quick little bio. So Don Haddad, I have the pleasure of introducing today. He has been successfully involved in an educational career that spans 40 plus years, if I'm not mistaken here, Don.
Oh.
And he previously served as the Superintendent Emeritus for the St. Vrain School District, where he served as superintendent from 2009 to 2025. And under this leadership, St. Vrain became a model for public excellence in the educational systems. And I'm going to go through just a couple of the awards that you have won. I can't touch on them all because that would take up the entire time that we have here today, Don. But a couple of these are the Colorado Communicator of the Year, Superintendent of the Year by the National Association of School Superintendents, Education Week Leader to Learn From. You were selected as one of the top 100 superintendents to participate in the Future Ready Superintendent Summit at the White House in 2014, and the Longmont Economic Development Chair's Choice Economic Development Impact Award. And I'm sure there's much more there, but with that, Don, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself to the audience.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to connect and to share some of my thoughts. I, as you mentioned, have completed my 40th year in public education. And throughout that time, I've had the opportunity to be a teacher, uh, head wrestling coach, a dean of students, an assistant principal, and a principal, an executive director, an assistant superintendent, a deputy superintendent, and then most recently the superintendent for the past 17 years. And I've been able to do this in 5 different school districts over 40 years. So I've seen a variety of places and really have enjoyed all of it.
You have, and you are obviously accomplished, as we said. But the great part is, the school systems in and out. You understand the mindset of students, you understand the mindset of parents, you understand the mindset of teachers and unions. But share a little bit about what you're doing now that your superintendent days are behind you. How are you still integrating yourself into the what I would say is global educational system?
I really enjoy presenting different themes and presentations at different conferences
Mhm.
around the United States. A lot of conversations with other superintendents, a lot of conversations with other types of leaders outside of education, and really just networking and mentoring. And I really have found that over time, you garner enough information and you can explain it in ways that I think can help newer superintendents. And so I'm doing quite a bit of that.
Mhm.
And, I really just stay up on current events and how public education matters in our world, in the United States, and spend a lot of time engaging with that. So, and I still have a lot of connections in different school districts, both in Colorado and outside, and enjoy staying involved with that as well.
Love it. Yeah. And we're going to talk throughout the course of this interview a lot about that engagement. We're going to talk about innovation. Of course, we have to touch on AI, which we'll probably get to at the end of the interview here. But just given your experience over the course of 40 years and maybe even just specifically the last 17 as superintendent, what do most people fundamentally misunderstand about how education and the educational system works?
Well, the first thing that's important to know about public education in the United States is it educates about 90% of our population. So 90% of people either have been in a public school, are, or will be. And the significance of that is that its primary role is to educate our nation. And doing so helps to preserve a strong democracy because well educated people that can think, can analyze, can really delve into information in a smart way, it's important. And I think people sometimes they lose that perspective of what public education means to this country as a whole. As a parent, I remember taking my child to school and I remember looking at their grades and getting involved in their homework. But at the time, I didn't really connect the dots that our nation's economy is dependent on the quality of our public schools. Public safety and national security is dependent on our public schools. Property values, whether it's your home or whether it's a business, commercial, all of these things, the service industry, the workforce, developing the workforce, all of these things are developed in the public schools. And if we see it in that way, we begin to understand the significance of it and we
Mm,
begin to talk about it a little differently and we begin to support it. One of the things that I think people misunderstand is the way in which schools are rated and districts are rated.
mhm,
They'll come out and they'll say this school is a high achieving school. This school is, rated with full accreditation, or this is partial accreditation, or this school needs improvement. But I don't think the public understands fully how those determinations are made.
mhm,
And if they did, they wouldn't pay much attention to them because the way in which public schools are rated are based on an accreditation system that's based on test scores. The reality is, for example, in Colorado, parents can opt their children out of tests. And so a large number, thousands of students aren't even taking the very same tests that are used to determine the quality of a school. And
mm,
so you might look at a school's rating and it might be rated very high based on test scores that the students never took. And it's really important to understand that because with the way in which schools are rated by those test scores, schools then don't put as much time and effort into a lot of the things that students actually need to be successful in this 21st century when you start talking about technology and AI and all of those kinds of things in a global environment. And
mm.
so the misunderstanding is one, that schools have this major, major impact on the quality of our nation and the strength of our nation. And two, I don't think many understand fully how to determine whether a school is a high quality school or a school that is simply being labeled as a high quality school. And more often than not, that label is born out of demographics, it's born out of socioeconomics than anything unique going on in a particular school. And so those are really important things, I think, for parents that are choosing which school, because I'm a strong believer in school choice.
Mm.
I think it's really important that before you make that choice, you really delve in to find out if that school is going to deliver a great education for your child.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And let's keep pulling on the parent thread, and then we're gonna circle back to the economic engine that schools, fundamentally drive. But as parents, let's talk about a couple of truths, maybe how they should be engaging with their school. So if they're trying to make the best choice for their child, how can they go about that to make sure that they are, number one, fully engaged, number two, they're asking the right question, and three, they are able to make the right decision for the future of their child and even for them as local community members.
Well, I think one of the first things that they should do is visit the school. And they should visit the school several times. Once perhaps in the morning, once in the afternoon, once towards the end of the day, and really get a feel for the climate and the culture. If they have
Mhm,
the opportunity, obviously, to visit and talk to the principal, the assistant principal, maybe a couple of teachers, to really understand what goes on in that school, and then to ask some key questions. For example, what's the school's attendance rate? Can you share with me a little bit about disciplinary measures? What are your discipline rates in this school? And what programs do you offer? I assume you offer reading and writing and math and science and all of those really important subject matters. But
mhm,
what else do you offer? Do you offer career and tech opportunities? Do you offer band? Do you offer the arts? Do you offer great athletic programs? And all of those types of things that will really help you understand what a school is all about. And the other thing is pay attention to details. When you pull into that parking lot, is the parking lot clean? When you walk in the front door, what's the message? Do they
Mhm.
have a sign up that says something like we have a pacemaker or, no guns allowed or et cetera, et cetera? Or do they have inspirational messages that speak to achievement and excellence and things like that? Because the messaging that you'll see in a school and on the entranceway and in the hallways, those messages will give you insight as to the culture of that school
Mhm.
and the leadership of that school. Those are really, really important things for a parent. And oftentimes the parent might, myself included, look at the rating in the newspaper and say, oh, that's a great school. And then they find that there really wasn't any substance behind that rating. And
Mhm.
sometimes there is,
Mhm.
but sometimes there isn't. And so you really have to, it's almost, like when you go buy a car. You want to do more than just take a look at the car from the outside. You want to
Yeah.
drive it. You want to understand it, how it works, how it functions.
Yeah.
And that's really important because it's one of the most important decisions a parent can make is where their
Mhm.
child's going to go to school.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And as a father of 3 myself, I'm getting into this age where, we are moving into elementary school. 2 of my kids are there now. My third will soon to be there. And these things are becoming much more important. How much do you find parents this day and age, or in your 40-year experience, have you seen almost parents become more engaged or less engaged in making these types of decisions? And I say that because a lot of people that I have seen, parents that I have seen, it's almost like a second thought. It's like, well, this school is just around the corner. It's the most convenient, so I'm going to push it there. Do you see parents becoming more engaged in making these decisions or less engaged over time?
No, I actually see them more engaged, and it's a good thing. I think in years past, I know for a fact when I was growing up, you went to the school that was within your neighborhood boundaries. Over time, choice evolved, and parents can make different choices for their children. And so they'll have these open house meetings, they'll have back to school night, they'll have all of these opportunities to actually look at the different options. In St. Vrain Valley schools, for example, about one third and a little bit more than a third of the students are attending a school that's not within their designated boundary
Mhm.
because they may want to pursue something like STEM. They may want to pursue something around the medical and the biosciences, et cetera, et cetera. And while all the schools in St. Vrain have a strong academic foundation, they each offer something a little unique as well. So
Mhm.
you get the traditional strong educational foundation with all of the co-curricular experiences, but you might also get something like aerospace
Mhm.
or energy or something that you want to pursue. And so parents are very engaged in that way. And I think that's a good thing. And not only when you're making the decision, but stay engaged throughout. Attend events, stay connected to the teachers, stay connected to the administration. All of those things, you'll find that your child's experience will be better and you'll know a lot more and be able to help and guide them. But parents are really, really key we know that in a child's life, but in a child's education, parents are perhaps the most influential factor in terms
Yeah.
of a child's success.
And that's a great point. It's not only the decision that's being made, it's then how are you following up with that and continuing to be engaged, throughout that child's entire education, right? And I think back to so I grew up in rural Minnesota as an example, and my mom in particular, both my parents were pretty engaged. They went to all the PTA meetings. It was a big priority. And I do think it made a difference. The teachers treated me differently. They knew some of the teachers by name. We were engaged and always at school events and things like that. And I just think, I look back for me and it was a pleasant experience, right? I didn't have a negative public educational experience, but I do feel and see sometimes, especially in the political climate this day and age, I almost get the sense that some of public perception is school districts and education is driven by ideological outcomes, right? And so, meaning, the teachers union or the teachers themselves or somebody has an ideology that they are trying to drum up through the educational system. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I feel like that is a big concern to a lot of parents out.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And the thing that I would tell you about ideology and sometimes where not only parents, but just the public at large get
Mhm.
their information because, only about a third of a community has children in the schools. The other 70% get their information off of either cable news or the newspaper or over the backyard fence or something, conversation in the grocery store. And more often than not, you're being given information that either is fully true and accurate, partially, or completely inaccurate. And the only way you're going to really know is to experience it yourself. The largest poll that they did in education, at least at the time, a Gallup poll, it was interesting when they asked parents, how would you rate public schools? Well, it came out with a C and in some cases a D with parents or adults who did not have children in school. The parents who had children in school rated the schools as A and B. And so the takeaway was if you're actually experiencing it, it's a great experience for most. When you're left to accepting somebody else's interpretation or their ideology, you come away with a completely different understanding or perception. And the reality is, and I've worked with teachers for years, and they overwhelmingly are incredible. And the schools are incredible. And oftentimes I will read something or watch something on a cable news show and I'll go, that is so untrue. And yet it's believed because somebody said it, and we expect people to say things that are accurate. And maybe they're not deliberately trying to mislead. Maybe they heard it from somebody. But the ideology right now that has become somewhat intrusive in schools is about people's belief around things unrelated necessarily to what public schools should be doing. They want to interject religion into the schools. They want to talk about social justice in the schools. They want to talk about a lot of things they're very important things, but I just question whether that's the role of a school or not. And I don't believe that it is. I think that schools should be safe places for every child and adult to be in. There should be exciting learning opportunities. You should be learning about math and reading and science and history and language arts and performing arts. You should have athletic experiences. You should be able to join clubs. You should make friends. It should be an amazing experience for a child. It shouldn't be a political battlefield. And there's a lot of people that want schools to carry their ideological message. And that's just not what schools should be doing. And in some cases, you might have, people will sometimes say, well, the teachers are doing these things and they're teaching kids values, which they shouldn't, et cetera, et cetera. You're talking about a very small portion. 99% of the teachers are engaged fully the way in which they should be. And as in every profession, you might have somebody that interjects an ideology where there's no place for it, and then that's addressed. But then that one little experience translates into, well, the schools as a whole are doing X, Y, and Z. And that's why it's so important to get into the schools, because a lot of what you hear is just not accurate. And I have, like I said, I've been in 5 school districts. I've worked with thousands of teachers and thousands of students. And I can tell you the work that's being done is incredible. And when you read about things, you just have to know that it may be true, it may not be true, it may be partially true. The only way you're going to know is if you delve in and find out for yourself.
Yeah, I fully second that. And staying engaged as well. Again, I know we've already covered that, but then you get the experience over time. You understand our conversations changing. Are the teachers, asking different questions to the students? Are they getting swapped out? Are they getting moved around consistently? But everything needs to go through a filter. And I think it's up to the parents to do that from go. That said, and I don't want to dig too deep in the ideology part of it, but one of the big questions I think the public may have is how are schools funded, right? And so, kind of sticking on that ideology thread to some degree, can you maybe come full circle on how schools are funded? And let's stick with public institutions because sometimes it almost feels like the two are correlated, right? The ideology comes from whoever is creating the funding for the schools, which obviously is based around certain political ties, potentially, whether the political donations coming from, major cities, metropolitan cities, or even the state itself. And I know you've done a lot of work in terms of grants coming back to your school district. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the primary source of funding is the allocation that you get for each student from the state. So, let's say it's $10,000 per student or 9,000. It varies, but that's your primary source of funding. Is what the legislature determines the per pupil allocation will be. Then you also get a second revenue stream from the federal government. And the federal government will fund things along Title I schools and special education and things along those lines. They'll get additional funding for some of the students that fall into those categories. And so those are your two primary sources. Another way that schools can receive funding is if they go out to their community and ask the community to raise their property value tax, a mill levy override, or a bond. A bond is for construction. The mill levy overrides can be used for salaries, for programs, et cetera. And so you can go out to your community and you can ask them to increase their taxes, and that can be another revenue stream. And then there are a plethora of grants out there that you can access. And then there are other ways that you can build up your own revenue streams. We partnered with 150 plus business and corporate partners, and they will provide resources, whether it's in terms of human resources or materials and equipment, or in some cases, actual dollars. You can take your grant money and use it where you would otherwise use general funds, and then you can build a reserve. That reserve will then begin to draw interest annually. And so you can get millions of dollars off of interest that you can then use for whatever you want to use for it, as long as it's, in alignment with your educational mission. So there's all kinds of different ways that schools can be funded, but the primary way is through the state and the federal government. In St. Vrain, for example, we passed 2 mill levy overrides and we passed a couple of bond initiatives. And when you look at all of that, plus the grants and everything, we brought in over $2 billion over and above what would normally be funded through the state and the federal government. And every year, St. Vrain will get about $70+ million from the 2 mill levy overrides, because they don't sunset. They go on in perpetuity, and they're based on fixed mill levy rates. So as the assessed valuation of an entire community increases, that mill levy override increases. And so St. Vrain is receiving all of that additional money. They get the state funding, the federal funding, the grants that we acquire, and then the mill levy overrides, and then the bonds, and then the business and the corporate partnerships. So there's a lot of different ways. And one of the things that's important is for schools and districts to take the lead on identifying how they can garner additional resources and not solely depend on what the state or the federal government is going to give them.
Yeah. I'm glad you finished up your answer in that way, because that was going to be my next question. I do want to pull on this a little bit because I do know the work that you've done with the Innovation Center. I did skip this in your bio up front, but now that you brought this up, I want to circle back to it, which is you were able to develop 70 instructional focused programs, implementing the state's first pathways to technology within the school, and you opened up a 50,000 square foot innovation center at St. Vrain, which I had personally been through, seen the results of that. You have some incredible partners that you've been able to bring in. What is and obviously that was a long road, and I'm sure took many conversations, as did the bond that you raised for the school district as well. Can you just highlight maybe the differences in how one would proactively go at one versus the other, and just again at a high level, the work that it really takes in the runway to land one or both of those options? Because that's just an incredible amount of innovation and funding coming back to the school district.
Well, we're growing as a school district, and that growth means we're going to be building more schools. We just passed a $750 million bond this last year, and they're going to build several new schools. They're going to actually take that innovation center that you saw, and that's doubling in its size. And so that's going to be huge. They're also going to be building a second district swimming pool and competing stadiums. We have 9 high schools and 6 of them have full-blown stadiums. The other 3 will be completed through the bond. So there's quite a bit of money there. And then as we sold some of our bonds, we got premiums. And so we ended up getting another 30 million with the sale of half those bonds, and we'll get another 30+ million with the sale of the other half. So the 750 million actually turns into about 810 million. And so that's, building out our programming, or our construction sites and our schools and our facilities. The mill levy overrides, we don't have to go for anymore because we have the 2 that are on, they don't sunset. So that mill levy override money comes in $70+ million every year. And that's used to buy, to hire teachers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the keys in getting that done, because in 1961, St. Vrain opened. And from 1961 to 2008, they were never able to successfully pass a mill levy override. The community always respectfully declined to raise their taxes. Since 2008, we've passed all five that we've attempted, the mill levies and the bonds. One of the most significant changes in that result, or those results, is that we stopped going to our community asking them what they could do for us. We kind of took a page out of John F. Kennedy's book, Ask Not What Your Country Can Do for You, Ask What You Can Do for Your Country. And so we decided to change our approach with the community. Instead of saying, hey, can you give us more money so that we can do X, Y, and Z, to we're going to strengthen your economy. We're going to strengthen safety, and we're going to raise the values of your homes and the businesses. We're going to increase the quality of the service industry. We're going to strengthen your workforce development. We're going to be a source of pride for you as a community. We're going to want to make everybody move into St. Vrain. And that's what we're going to do for you. That's a very different approach than what many school districts will do. You'll hear them go out and say, our class sizes are too big. We need more money. We can't pay our teachers enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's not a message that breeds confidence.
Right.
It's not a message that says, hey, I want to be part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, can you imagine if Toyota went out and said, look, our cars don't drive well, and I'm using Toyota, but Toyota has great cars. I'm just using them. They don't go out and say our tires don't hold air, our windshield wipers squeak, or we don't get good gas mileage, but if you give us more money, we'll build a better car. No, they build a great car and they tell you about it.
Yeah.
And that's why people buy them. It's no different than schools. Parents want to send their child to a winning school. They don't want to send their child to a fix-it place. And so it's important to communicate like that. And that's why we've been able, and we've also delivered. Our teachers have delivered the product. So it's not just telling, it's showing. And our teachers and administrators have done a great job of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I just wanted to comment on that because that was the piece I wanted to say. When I personally went in there, number one, I was blown away. Your partners say it all in the Innovation Center, but most importantly, number one, everybody I met was extremely happy, very friendly, really did care about the students. You could tell that. But two, I walked into a couple of rooms and there's all these 3D printers that are there, and the kids are learning how to CAD and design their own things. They're flying drones around. They're rebuilding airplanes. They're putting them together so that these planes can go be flown. You have entrepreneurship programs. And I thought a lot of these things are just so interesting because it was a complete juxtaposition versus some of what I would say is the historical education that most people are accustomed to, right? The Innovation Center, which has been driven by, I think, the vision and the marketing that you're talking about, has made a difference, not only to the community, but these students are getting access to things that I really haven't seen anywhere else in this type of education environment.
We built on a system that we refer to as foundation innovation. And so in every one of our schools, you're going to get a great educational academic foundation. You're going to get math, reading, writing, history, language arts, world language. You're going to get it all, and you're going to get the very best. Our teachers are outstanding. And layered on top of that foundation of academic rigor and excellence, you get robust innovation. And it's the two of those. So the kids are being exposed. We have 260 robotics teams, and we're ranked number one in the world. We've won the world championships twice. We have the only first high school drone team in the world. They're doing presentations and shows all over the place. They're doing one this past weekend at the Future of Education and Technology conference, and AI teams and cybersecurity teams and virtual reality and augmented reality and aerospace and aeronautics and aviation and video. All of these things layered on top of the academic rigor equates to a strong competitive advantage. We have among the highest graduation rates, but the highest in the Denver metro area and the highest requirements in the Denver metro area. And so we expect the most and we get the best from our students. And that's what they need. They need the academic rigor and the innovation so that they're not only walking away with a diploma, they're walking away with a strong competitive advantage. And that's really what education, I believe, should look like.
I wholeheartedly agree. And we're going to get into the student piece of this. So, again, glad you ended your response in that capacity. Just kind of trying to tie up some loose ends here, though. How do you? I know you've created everything you have at St. Vrain, and have created that leadership, not only just in the team, the teachers, the students, the graduation rate, the innovation center. How do you utilize that then to inspire other educational systems within Colorado specifically or others around the nation? As an example, I look at what is being done in my hometown in rural Minnesota, right? We don't have an innovation center. We're probably still teaching shop class, rebuilding engines, things that are still applicable, but not as much as learning cybersecurity or working on drones or robotics that are going to take kids into the future. So, how do you kind of use what you've created to then inspire and motivate other systems, parents, educators to do either follow suit or to maybe creatively think and use resources in a different way?
Well, we involve people at every level. I had a superintendent student advisory council where we had dozens of students from all of the high schools, would meet with them regularly, and their leadership was significant in helping develop a lot of these programs. Our teachers are engaged fully, not just during the school year, but into the evenings, into the summers, over the vacation periods of time. They're just fully dedicated. Their
Mhm,
leadership is instrumental. We had Leadership St. Vrain, where we would run a 6-month program for parents, and they would come into a different school. We'd have about 100 every year. They'd come into a different school, and they would learn about that school, but they would learn about the district as a whole, and they would engage their leadership. We had business partnerships where the business community and corporate executives would come in, and they would give us their expertise, and they would provide leadership. So it's something that was extensive and diversified across a lot of different, groups. And
mhm,
and that's really, it's critical because you Saint Vrain, I could tell you, I know a lot of people might say this, but it's really true. The team in Saint Vrain is second to none. I'm no longer there, but they are.
mhm,
And that's why you see Saint Vrain not only maintaining, but continuing to climb
mhm,
because the leadership came from so many different people. It didn't come from me in isolation. It
mhm,
came from a lot of different people on the
mhm,
team, the teachers, the students, the parents. It's an amazing community.
mhm,
And when you build that kind of culture and there's so many people contributing their expertise and their passion, you
mhm,
can't help but be successful. And
mhm,
that's I think the secret sauce of St. Vrain. It's all of the people involved. And you leave and they get a new superintendent who is a deputy superintendent and
mhm,
she's doing a great job
mhm.
and she's been there for years and so it carries on and the team carries on and then they build the next iteration. So yeah, it's something I'm very, very proud of.
As you should be. I mean, it's incredible what you've been able to do. And now I want to talk about not only the leadership team that you put in there that are still kind of carrying this amazing legacy forward, but let's talk about the students because obviously, I think there is a perception of, students go to school, they're going to be educated the same way, they're all going to come out the same. You've proven that that isn't really true. And at Habitual Growth, as you know, we are big believers in accountability, responsibility. So when you start to strip away IQ, you start to strip away maybe talent and just the overarching theme of intelligence. From your experience, what do you see, whether it's behaviors, discipline, fortitude, are the habits that consistently separate high performing students from those who struggle in educational systems?
Yeah. Well, I think hard work has been misunderstood. A lot of times people will believe the way in which you show that you care about somebody is to not expect much out of them. Don't
Mhm,
challenge them. Don't push them. Don't make them work hard. Don't expect them to work hard. They have to have a strong work ethic, and parents are instrumental in developing that. They have to understand that hard work is not something, there's an old saying, work smarter, not harder. That's not accurate. You got to work smarter and harder, and you can't separate the two. There's no high level of success that you're going to achieve without a work ethic. You have to show up. You have to be responsible. You have to be on time. People have to know that they can rely on you, not only in school, but when you get into the workforce. They have to be able to rely on you as a family member, as a
mhm,
friend. You
mhm,
have to be reliable and responsible. And you have to have a curiosity about you that you're constantly looking to grow. You're interested in knowing more than you already know. And that's the whole concept of design thinking. You empathize a problem, you ideate the solutions, you test them, you prototype, test, and then revise. And that's all born out of curiosity and creativity and innovation and those types of things. And you have to have a championship mindset. You have to want to be exceptional. And that comes from hard work, and it comes from a culture that you're involved in at home, and it comes from a culture that you're involved in at school, in the workforce, everywhere. And, that kind of mindset is contagious. I tell you, watching teachers learn from each other and get excited about knowing something they didn't previously know,
Mhm.
and then they teach it to someone else, and then they all come together. It's a powerful force
Yeah.
when you build that kind of a culture, and then the expectation is there. But those are the kinds of things that students need. And,
Mhm.
they need to work on their knowledge base, and intellect is critically important too. But all of those things are, there's an old saying, Eric Hoffer, who is a philosopher, he said, if we continue to educate our children, and I'm paraphrasing, but if we continue to educate our children the same way in which we were educated, they'll be beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. And it's really true. And so
Mhm.
there are so many facets to getting a great education, and that they all have to come together.
Yeah, I'm smiling so much because that I mean, you're speaking my language, Don. Obviously, I like to think that I parent in that way. I when I grew up, I'll give my mom and dad a lot of credit. We had to do things all around the house. My mom had this, so we were cooking dinner when we were very young. We had to make our bed when we grew up. Every morning when we got up, we had to various chores. We had to mow the lawn and feed the
Yeah,
animals and things like that. And I think responsibilities like that helped me build my own personal structure. But the tough love that I feel like I received, and I'm just going to keep this about me as the example, almost got lost. And we see generations that were participation trophies. You showed up, hey, here you go, you got a trophy. And I didn't grow up in that world. And I think now we're starting to kind of see more or less these short term reward systems going away. We're kind of snapping back. And I don't like the term tough love, but I like the responsibility, accountability piece. When you are innovating, and I like what you said as well about, the teachers when they learn something new, they get excited. And what was really cool when I was touring St. Vrain, I saw that too. There was a lot of curiosity of meeting kids with the programs where they're at, as they get access to different technologies, cell phones, iPads, when they're playing around with social media, how do you turn that into a security thing? When they're watching some of the new ESPN sports of gaming and robotics, hey, I can go build that and participate in it
yeah.
too. So do you feel like the short term performance and reward systems that maybe were 5, 10 years ago are going away and those are being replaced by better long term habits for students now?
I do. I do. And I think there's a sense that we have to make sure that we're not giving students the wrong impression. And what I mean by that is we have to make sure that they understand the process of establishing a goal and being persistent in the pursuit of that goal, and
Hmm.
understanding that there will be setbacks and you have to be resilient. And we're going to keep expecting more of you because we believe you can do it. I'm not saying you get to a point where you're pushing people beyond their limits, but I think there's a misunderstanding of what their limits are. And so, yes, I believe that people have seen when you don't expect much and you create an environment where everything is considered excellent, whether it is or it isn't, that you're doing a disservice to that child and that community. And I think if you have high expectations and you bolster those expectations with kindness and resources and support, the boundaries are limitless. I mean,
Hmm.
kids will go places and do things that we may thought they never were capable of, but they are. I'll give you one little example, and it is a little example, but there's a bigger reason for it. With the onset of technology and all of the things, we have the capacity to deliver quality instruction to a child at home. They
Hmm.
have their devices, their iPads. The teachers have them in the classrooms, at home, et cetera, et cetera. When it came to what we were after COVID, what are we going to do about snow days? We decided we're going to have learning continue with the child at home for a couple of hours
Hmm.
instead of canceling school.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people were fine with that, but there were some who weren't. And they were like, we should have a snow day. We should have a day off. And they couldn't understand at the time and didn't agree with it at the time. And maybe they still don't. But what I was trying to inspire in them is that one, I shouldn't have the authority to cancel school altogether. But
Mhm.
two, I want you to understand how critically important school is. And
Yeah.
because it snowed, I'm not going to take that opportunity away from your child. And I want your child to believe that it's okay to get up early and it's okay to work hard and they
Mhm.
can do that without feeling like they're being put upon. And it
Yeah.
was a message behind the message that hard work is a good thing.
Mhm.
Embrace it and look for it.
That's amazing. I like sharing this example, so I'm going to give you the example, and then I'm going to spin it back into two questions for you. So you talked about children's limits. So I have young kids, as you know. So my eldest is 7, my middle child is 5 now, and then my youngest is 3. So I'm kind of in that mix. 2 years ago, actually, Bree and I were out for a hike, and we were at one of the 14ers out here in Colorado, and we went out there just to honestly just kind of take a leisurely hike. We didn't really plan anything out of that. And we started walking up the mountain, and I'm always prepared. So we had plenty of water, plenty of food. People don't need to worry about that. But we kind of started going, and it ended up being this fun game where it was like, hey, see that ridge up there? We're going to get to that ridge, and then we're just going to sit down and have a little snack, right? Long story short, at 6, 4, and 2, obviously the 2-year-old was on my back. They hiked their first 14er. But what was really fascinating about it is Bree and I talked about it on the drive up. We just said, hey, our goal isn't actually to get to the top, right? We never told the kids that. But what we did is we made a commitment to ourselves to simply say, we're not going to tell them it's going to be hard. We're not going to tell them they can't do something. Instead, we're going to say, hey, you see that up there? We're going to go for it. Let's just go up there. We'll take our own pace. Let's have this walk. But at that young of an age, they went and did it. And it actually really surprised me. I mean, these little kids hiked, 8 hours. They got to the top of a 14er. They had the time of their life. They came back and bragged to all their friends and, all their teachers and even our neighbors and just said, look at what we accomplished. And it was such a proud moment for me, not even yes, to see my kids do that, but also to see what happens when we put our own perspectives and fears and risks, I think, on somebody else. And like you said, kids can do extraordinary things. So the question, kind of bringing this full circle, is one, from a teacher perspective, are there things that faculty need to work on when it comes to students and almost putting caps on them? And then the same question for parents at home in different environments. What could both of those two individuals in a school setting and then at the home setting be doing to not inhibit our children's growth and put our own almost perspectives on that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a change that we made years ago that I think speaks to what you're saying in from the school's perspective and teachers.
Mhm.
They used to have what was called a 4x4 schedule at the high school level.
Okay.
And that would mean that kids would take 3 classes and they would go every day and they'd get a year's credit within that first semester. But the problem with that, as I saw it, is you're only taking 3 classes, maybe
Mhm.
four.
Mhm.
And so you would only get math for half the year. You would only get language arts for half the year, band for half the year. So we changed it to where we were an alternating block, and now kids can take 8 classes
Yeah.
and they can take them all year. And so there were some when we did that who said, you're going to put too much pressure on students. And I said to them, really a kid can do more than 3 classes. You're imposing upon them a limit that's not realistic. And
Yeah.
not only can they, but they want to. They
Mhm.
want world language all year. They want to be part of a band all year. They want to hone their math skills all year. The
Mhm.
other thing that we found, and this is pervasive in a lot of high schools across the country, the graduation requirements were lower. So kids would finish their requirements maybe by the end of the first semester of their senior year, and then they would take 2 classes, 1 class, and be done. We changed the rule to where you have to remain a full-time student until the day you graduate because the goal isn't graduation.
Mhm.
The goal is preparation for life, for post secondary and life. And so we're going to challenge you right up until the day you walk out that door so that when we say goodbye to you, we have
Mhm.
sent you on your way with a strong competitive advantage.
Mhm.
And so when you ask the question, what can we be doing? Get kids involved. Don't assume that they're overworked or overstressed. Now, in some cases, they might be, and we have to recognize that. And we
Mhm.
have to pull back a little bit and we have to give them support. But overall, kids are really resilient and they like to be involved and they
Yeah.
like to take the classes and they like to be involved in sports. Parents, I would say the same thing. Be engaged with your your child. With parents, 99% of the parents I've known have been outstanding and they are engaged. But I'd monitor them at home. If they're staying up till 11 o'clock at night with their iPhone and texting, you might
Mhm.
want to check into that and see what
Yeah.
they're texting. And social media, it's okay to see what they're putting out on Facebook or on Twitter or on
Mhm.
Instagram and be involved and monitor them.
Mhm.
Right now they're talking about, should we outlaw phones in schools?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's not a school's role to say yes or no. It's a parent's decision as to whether or not their child should have a phone in school.
Mhm.
And it's the school's role to say you can't have the phone on during school. You can have it in your backpack, you can have it during passing periods, during lunch, but when class is going on, and it's a simple classroom management issue. But what we've done as a society is say, well, let's create a rule because we've assumed that kids aren't capable of managing themselves. They
Mhm.
are if we
Mhm.
have the structure and we're consistent. So
Mhm.
parents, I don't believe should be saying to a school, I want you to make a rule. If you don't want your child to have a cell phone, then you take the lead and make sure that they understand they shouldn't have it on during school. And you do the same at home.
Mhm.
And teachers, that classroom is your classroom. You lead it and you manage it, and you shouldn't expect someone else to manage that classroom for you.
Mhm.
If the student's pulling out the phone, tell them very clearly no and hold to your expectation versus complaining that cell phones are out of control in a school.
Yeah.
We've got to remember that we have the authority and the ability to establish the expectations and to follow up with them. And
Mhm.
I think that that's really important for parents not to relinquish their role as a parent to the
Okay.
school and for schools not to relinquish the students' responsibility in managing themselves and to have high expectations for what we expect and what we reinforce. And I think that that's really, really important. I saw a quick blurb on the news the other 2 days ago, and I said this to a friend. The headline was, "Is the cold weather affecting kids' ability, energy levels?" And I said, here we go.
Yeah.
We've got another reason to believe now it's the cold weather that means we can lower our expectations.
Yeah.
And I just thought, we've got to stop doing that. There are limits. Trust me, I know that. But there are also perceived limits that we're creating that I think hinder a child's ability to excel across the board. And that's all part of building a championship culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I laugh all the time at those headlines. And I would say as a parent, it is actually frustrating to see some of those things come true. Like my kids are resilient. They're young. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're like when they are in high school. But they go outside and play in bare feet in the snow for a couple of minutes because they have a good time. Like they're experimenting, they're trying things out. That's not inhibiting them from learning, but they've got to try things out to learn what's good for them, what's not good for them. And it's my job to monitor them, to make sure that they're safe, to make sure that they have the information so they have the right context of what they're getting themselves into. But when you change the rules for your high school students, let's go from that four square up to the 8 classes a day, making sure they were enrolled right to the very end. What are the biggest gaps that you see right now between graduation and real world readiness? Because I think you've done a good job. I really liked how you articulated this. What can other school districts look to? And then also, what can students themselves, like, let's take that personal accountability and responsibility. Let's bring that in. So, if there's any high school students or parents of high school students, what can they be doing right now to make sure they are real world ready after high school years?
Yeah, I think that whole concept of foundation innovation is important. They have to leave with a strong foundation in reading and writing and math and science and world languages and language arts and all of those things. And it's really important that they have that foundation and the discipline that comes along with it, meaning the discipline to stay focused and do your best work, do your homework and do your classwork and be a real
Mhm.
strong student. They also need that exposure and that sophistication, whether they agree with it or not, the technology is a big part of who we are as a world. And it's important. One of the things about education is we're dealing with multiple generations. You've got your students, you've got your students' parents, and then you've got your grandparents. And each one has a different perception and paradigm. And what's important for readiness in this world is that strong foundation that our generations really prioritized and standardized tests and all of those things. But now, if they don't have, AI, if they don't have a background in quantum, if they don't have virtual reality, augmented reality, coding, computer science, robotics, all of these things are going to be a big part of the world in which they're growing up. And so we have to make sure they're getting all of that. And some of the generations that we serve, meaning parents and grandparents and others, that's not their paradigm.
Yeah.
They want to see how that child does on that standardized test, period. And while there's room for a standardized test in the equation, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do is, give that broad preparation. I think you're going to find most of the jobs, many of them are going to be done through telecommunications. Many of them are going to be done through robotics. I don't think we're going to ever replace the human element, but the human element without the ability to leverage technology
Mhm.
is it's going to be a problem.
Mhm.
And not only in the United States, but we have to be able to compete against other countries in the global environment. And there is an AI race, there is a quantum race, and the outcome of those races is significant, and so it has to be part of our educational system by design, not an afterthought.
Mhm. Well, and just on that, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the AI piece. So, Elon Musk obviously is one of the prominent figures in this, Sam Altman and a few other, Elon was on Joe Rogan a couple of months ago and brought up the term AI tsunami, right? And which is a pretty scary term, especially from coming from a guy who is in the industry and has all the technical capabilities that he does. But how are we preparing for AI in education? And then the second kind of follow-up question to that is how are we doing that when comparative to the rest of the world? Because it is very much a country by country race at this point.
In 2007, Thomas Friedman wrote a book, the title, Thank You for Being Late. And in that book, he described what happened in 2007 as a supernova. And it was when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone and Twitter was launched and Facebook was launched
Mhm.
and GitHub was launched and Hadoop was launched and fracking and Watson, with the whole Jeopardy thing and IBM. And so the world was changing dramatically in 2007. Fast forward to 2019 and whatever, we had the pandemic, and public education for the most part was caught off guard. They couldn't deliver. Some could, we could because we were focused on that, but they couldn't deliver a lesson to a child's home. Everybody was thrown into a tailspin. And so my question was, why were you thrown into a tailspin if you knew 12 years ago that the world was changing and the technology was available for you to be able to be prepared? So now you fast forward and you look at AI and you look at quantum, they make 2007 supernova look like a turtle in terms of pace. And so the question is, are we going to be prepared? Because you're not going to get a second mulligan, meaning public education is not going to get a second chance to be asleep at the wheel. And so when you ask how we're doing, there are still school districts that say, well, we've got to ban AI. We've got to ban chat GPT. We've got and you're looking at it and say, you've got to stop
Mhm.
with that mindset.
Mhm.
You can't slow the pace. You can create policies and you can create opportunities, but you've got to prepare them. In St. Vrain, all of our teachers and staff have gone through and continue to go through, have professional development around AI. We have student
Mhm.
AI teams. We building out an AI system within the district that you can
Mhm.
access information. And so the whole drone show thing the kids are doing, leading it in quantum. We had a session where the governor came to our school district and launched a major quantum initiative in the state
Oh.
of Colorado. And our
Mhm.
school district is one of the, key influencers in that space. And it's not me. I don't have the knowledge or the capacity to do that,
Mhm.
but there are people on our team who do. So we provide the resources. So in some places, it's being launched really well and
Mhm.
done really well. In other places, there's an avoidance. There's a fear of it.
Yeah.
There's how are the focus, how are we going to keep kids from cheating? Well,
Yeah.
we can do both at the same time.
Yeah.
And, other countries are, I know there's a lot. We hear about what's going on in China and we hear about what's going on in the European nations. And we're doing some great work in the United States as well.
Mhm.
But it's a critical thing when not only from a knowledge standpoint, but just think of the national security. I mean,
Yeah.
if you can shut down a country's electric grid, if you can, stop, interfere with their banking systems, all of those things. So we have to be prepared. And therein lies too why we need to expand our thinking around what public education should be. And it
Mhm.
can't be limited to a standardized test,
Yeah.
so.
I love that. That's great. I'm glad we touched on this. A couple of thoughts that came to mind when you were speaking. One, I don't think avoidance is an option, and as you were kind of sharing, It's probably not the right analogy, but it's that fight or flight, right? Sticking your head in the sand doesn't do you any good because whether you like it or not, the world and especially AI is not slowing down. It's going to hit, it's going to come. So, what you can do is participate, get engaged, and really, quote unquote, start to fight. And what I mean by that is educate yourself, right?
Yeah.
But it takes a leader with a vision, such as yourself, your team, that have gone out and purposely tried to bring that in to educate the students and the teachers on how to do that. Be the liaison between the technology that is scary, perhaps for some people, but that fear is justified in a number of capacities, but also is the potential on how do you leverage that to better educate people, how to bring those dollars back to the community, how to engage the students for their future. So you can choose to look at it one way or another. But from a student perspective, how can they thrive in an AI driven future, especially the kids where technology is moving so fast, AI specifically, right? In 2 years, it's going to be a very different world than where it is today. And that's not a lot of time specifically for somebody who is in, grades 9 through 12, maybe. So I know what you're doing at St. Vrain, but maybe outside of the educational system, what can students be doing in the home environment?
Well, I think that parents can provide opportunities where internet access is available to students at home, and schools can help with that access for some students who may not be socioeconomically in a position to be able to afford it. But
Yeah.
exposure to it
Mhm.
and the parent getting involved in it and being able to work with the student and understand. And the parents can go to the schools and get some information and some knowledge and some support that they can begin to partner. Students, they're first and foremost, students are going to follow the lead of their parents for the
Mhm.
most part
Mhm.
before they do anybody else. And if a parent is supportive of it and understands the impact and the influence it's going to have on their, then the student will begin to prioritize it too.
Mhm.
If the parent or the teacher or the superintendent or anybody, if their mindset is too much screen time, there is such a thing as too much screen time. I'm
Mhm.
not diminishing that concern.
Mhm. Mhm.
Parents should monitor that, and so should schools. But if that's how you see technology and that's the only way you see technology, your child is going to be deficient in an area that he or she really needs to be proficient in. So
Yeah.
it's finding that balance. Yes, let's monitor screen time, but let's not monitor it to the extent that we cripple our kids in terms of skill sets that they're going to need. And so it's all of these people working together. And when teachers begin to understand it and they begin to implement it into their classrooms, they become more comfortable with it. Our students in preschool are working with iPads and design thinking. And by the time they get to middle school, it's like what we used to think of a pencil and paper and a crayon is their comfort level with technology. And so
Mhm.
we have to let them run with it and not impose our own fear of it and our own limitations on them. They don't have that same hesitation. And I will tell you, we have students that work and get paid fixing iPads and technology and becoming Apple certified and all of these kinds of things. And, I tell the people in the workplace that are hosting internships and apprenticeships that look, our freshmen in high school today have the skill set and the capacity that we had when we were sophomores in college. So
Yeah.
you've got to shift your paradigm to understanding that a high school kid today is so much more sophisticated than we were in terms of our skill sets and our ability. And so we actually have to catch up to them in the way
That's a
in which
great
we're
point.
going to.
It actually makes me rethink how I'm parenting away from screen time. Maybe
Yeah.
repurposing that vision and that drive.
But you do have to monitor screen time. I'm not diminishing that. You do, because you don't want a kid sitting in front of that all day long and all night. But monitoring it and, being afraid of it or avoiding it completely, they're two extremes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, with everything that we've talked about today, Don, what are you most hopeful for about the future of education? Let's kind of wrap up here with just, we've talked about the history, funding, ideology. AI is obviously changing things to a greater degree. And we know what students and parents can be doing to get involved and keep their creativity up. But what are you personally looking forward to seeing in education moving forward over the next 5 years?
We've been very active legislatively in St. Vrain, and our most recent success was that we spearheaded an initiative to change the accreditation system. And so now the accreditation system will look at much more than the result of a test. It will look at what are the opportunities that are being afforded to students, career and tech opportunities, high tech opportunities, all of these kinds of things. And what I am looking forward to is the public education embracing the challenge and the opportunity, because the world's most complex problems are on the cusp of being solved with this generation and the use of a strong academic, rigorous foundation coupled with robust innovation. These tools that are available to these students and their comfort level, they have the potential, if we get it right in public education and give them that foundation and that innovation, they have the potential to tackle some of the world's most challenging problems that we in our generation were not able to overcome. And I'm excited about that. And I always say to people in my family and others, I said, there's going to be a time I'm going to be sitting there watching TV. There's going to be a person come on TV and they're going to have found the cure to all of cancer. Or they're going to found and they're going to ask that person, tell us about how you got here. And they're going to say, I went to school in St. Vrain and I was part of this program, a medical and biosciences program, and it inspired me. And the next thing you know, we were using AI. And that's what I'm most excited about, is the potential of this generation. It's amazing. And when you get to see it up close,
Hmm.
that's when you get really inspired. And that's why I
Yeah.
said I want people to really know what public education's about, because it's powerful, it's impactful, and it's amazing what's happening in most schools. And I want the narrative that's being promoted in the country to be a positive one, a winning one that supports public education, because it's the backbone of our country. It's
Hmm.
where we educate our children and our
Yeah.
population. But you're going to see solutions coming fast and furious with the capacity that far exceeds what we had in our generation. Absolutely. No, I could talk about this for hours. All right. Thank you.